Chapter 16, Dem the Torpedoes. Dem the Torpedoes. On the yacht, there was only the yacht. Lake Michigan stretched endlessly in every direction. Ice floes bobbed on the surface, but diminished as they sailed further from the coast. Their topography became a blue plain of water under the white plain of sky, the murmur of waves and the scentless spray up the boat's sides. This nothingness stirred one's agoraphobia. Although Hedwig held the railing, her knees buckled as for a moment it felt like she had become unmoored in the world, like she fell upward, because so little remained of landscape. The typical indicators of position dissolved into dust. In that moment it felt like only her, Hedwig, existed, on this formless canvas of color. But she had a yacht and 21 young women alongside her. And a constant buzz of information in her ear. None of them knew any nautical terms, but Orland and her cohort barked them anyway. Port and starboard, aft and keel. The yacht had criminally simple controls, probably modified by magic sometime in the past so the Empress could use her army of teenage girls to pilot it instead of hiring an actual staff. Orland's aggressive seamanship meant nothing but a continued adherence to formality. Knowing the names of all the places on the yacht might have been useful for troop organization, but none of the Empire's files discussed something like that. The best way Hedwig understood it was like a three-layer cake. The first layer of the ship comprised what she assumed would be called the main deck. Then there was a second layer and a third layer, each smaller than the last, with decks of their own. Ladders and steps led up to each progressive deck with an alien cluster of antennae at the absolute top. The front portion of the ship, from about its midpoint to the bowsprit, was open enough for many people to run around. The back of the ship, by contrast, required you to squeeze if two people wanted to pass. Along each layer were tinted windows, and inside the yacht an uncertain collection of rooms. Intimate familiarity with this topography might prove inessential. If her plan operated at maximum capacity, then only the vast ocean stretch into the mist mattered. But she intended to maintain her awareness and keep contingencies available.
What's our proximity to the enemy, Paulus?
Paulus, by order, had remained glued to Hedwig's side the entire time, at the back of the boat where they had the best view of the line of attack.
2 signatures 9 miles west, moving away from us at constant rate. 1 signature 6 miles west, moving closer at a slow but constant rate.
So the plan held together so far. The Seattle sisters were forced to remain on the coast, while the Terminatrix flew after the yacht. She wondered why the younger Seattle had not yet attempted to fire on them with her sniper rifle, but either way, Hedwig definitely did not want to force them out of the 10-mile range of Paulus's radar. Losing sight of them would be worse than potentially escaping the younger Seattle's attack range. "Orland," she said telepathically. "Stop the ship. We'll hold here." "Yes, milady." The whir of the yacht's engines died moments later. The froth of stirred water in their wake died to ripples and the yacht stood still on the placid, icy drink.
"The Terminatrix's signature is now gaining at a much quicker rate. 5 miles in closing,"
said Paulus. Hedwig pulled from her thick furred jacket a pair of binoculars and stared into the white. Winter fog reduced visibility worse than she hoped, but not as bad as she expected. Nonetheless, she had 0 eyes on the Terminatrix.
"We'll have to rely on Paulus's radar to adjust our fire. Makina, Hazel Crest, Munster. Ready your weapons."
The 3 girls in the platoon with long-range attacks transformed and stood in a line to Hedwig's left. Makina aimed an old-timey musket with a barrel that funneled outward like a gramophone. Hazel Crest drew a yew-bow notched with an arrow covered in thorns and saplings. Munster summoned an orb of purple energy between her palms. No other members of Joliet's platoon had effective ranges over 3 miles, and none of the terrestrial weaponry, even enchanted, came close.
Direct them, Paulus. Show them which way to aim.
Paulus nodded and shot her hand ahead of her at a slight angle to the upper right. She closed her eyes, cupped her other hand over her ear, and allowed her head to droop. Her outstretched arm adjusted its direction modicum by modicum.
Remember to compensate for wind speed,
said Hedwig, although magical girls with long-ranged attacks tended to have an intuitive knack for those kinds of things, rendering the reminder pointless and probably annoying.
Griffith, is your power ready?
The soldier in question, already transformed, stood on the second deck. She held a whimsical, camera-like device.
Yes, milady. 4 miles in closing,
said Paulus.
Fire!
Makina, Hazel Crest, and Munster unleashed their weapons in unison. At the same time, Griffith's camera contraption flashed, and for a split second the colors of the world inverted and a nauseating sense of distortion ripped through Hedwig's body. The moment passed, the distortion ceased, and everything returned for normal except for the 3 projectiles just then fired were copied 7 times apiece and 24 attacks total zoomed in the direction Paulus indicated. Griffith's power duplicated small objects of her choice, and Hedwig hoped an increase in projectiles would compensate for the uncertainty of their accuracy. 3 crystal shards, 3 sapling-strewn arrows, and 3 purple energy balls zoomed over the ocean and cut swirls into the mist before the mist closed back up and they saw nothing.
Ready volley 2,
said Hedwig, hand pressed to her forehead.
Paulus, update me on. She's falling back,
said Paulus.
No, not falling back, lateral movement north, and down. Here.
Her outstretched arm redirected.
Volley 2 ready,
said the 3 long-range attackers in eerie unison.
Camera ready,
said Griffith.
Fire.
The second flash made Hedwig's eyes go spotty, but the 24 projectiles launched in the intended direction.
She's heading up now. Ready volley 3. Midlothian, cubes.
Midlothian, who would have been the most useless member of Joliet's platoon if Joliet herself did not exist, tottered to the 3 long-range girls. She clutched a shoebox-sized container and opened it to provide a grief cube to each of them, before climbing up the ladder to the second deck to dispense another to Griffith.
Volley 3 ready. Camera ready. Fire.
This pattern continued 7 more times. After volley 10, Paulus reported that the Terminatrix had ceased evasive maneuvers and actually initiated a retreat, at least a temporary one.
She's hovering about 5 miles away,
said Paulus.
That's still in my range,
said Hazel Crest.
Shall I fire again? Save the energy. Inform me the moment she advances again.
A deep breath. The air around her turned white and dispersed. Between both Denver's records and the Empire, they knew jack cock about the Terminatrix. The only useful information came from the accounts of Paulus, Clown Muffle, and Cook about the St. Louis operation, and Midlothian's account of the attack that killed Bolingbroke. In fact, Midlothian's account had proved the most useful, because it indicated the Terminatrix herself had little defensive capability. One of Midlothian's attacks had paralyzed her for several seconds. Based on that, and the fact that the Terminatrix liked to linger far from the action while her goons did the work, Hedwig assumed she would take particular care to avoid any attacks levied at her actual person. A faster, stronger, better defended magical girl might plow through even the duplicated attacks. The entire plan relied on the weakness of the Terminatrix herself, and somehow Hedwig's educated assumption proved correct. She breathed again and closed her eyes.
It's going well.
Joliet from the second deck, beside Griffith. God damn it, Hedwig had told her to remain far away and make as little noise as possible.
Yes, so far. Now milady, please return to movement from the Seattle twins,
said Paulus.
They're starting to close on us. 8 miles. They're moving slower than the Terminatrix did. What?
Said Joliet.
But the coast is 9 miles away, how are they? A boat,
said Hedwig. Joliet clawed at her face and screeched some devil cry.
A boat, oh no, a boat, we didn't even consider they might get a boat of their own.
It took mustered fortitude not to fall into Joliet's trap of stupidity. The Seattle sisters getting onto a boat was a good thing. It meant the younger sisters' range was less than 9 miles, they needed to close the gap somewhat. No way would they attempt to reach the yacht via boat, because the boat moved slower than the Terminatrix and had less maneuverability. If Joliet's platoon could keep the Terminatrix from advancing, they'd be able to blast the boat from under Seattle long before they got close. Hedwig remained still, allowed her jacket to flutter, crossed her arms, and waited. 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 Teeth clenched.
They've stopped,
said Paulus.
6 miles west. That must be the younger sister's range,
said Hedwig. It was surprisingly not much longer than Hazel Crest's range.
Shield Team, Section A, get ready.
Shield Team consisted of 7 members, defensive abilities being more common than long range. However, the narrow area of open deck at the back of the yacht lacked space for all 7 to cluster.
Hence Section A, Section B, and Section C.
Idiotic names, right? Hedwig coined them herself. Apparently a need for stupid formal nomenclature existed after all. Ha! The magical girls Homewood, Tinley, and Lamont crowded onto the back deck. Hedwig raised her binoculars and stared into the white.
It looks like they left the physician and her assistants unharmed,
said Paulus.
I still read their signatures on the coast. Don't bother me with irrelevant, there.
A black sphere shot out the mist and hurtled their way, not appreciably slower than an actual bullet, despite being the size of a wrecking ball. Shield Team Section A activated defensive barriers, staggered by each girl's reaction speed, Tinley first, Lamont second, Homewood third. By that time the wrecking ball bullet had already crossed the approximate mile of visibility. Tinley's checkerboard pattern paper wall broke instantly, and in that moment Hedwig's heart crumpled because despite the ostensible flimsiness of her barrier, Tinley was strongest of the 3. But her wall did something because the wrecking ball smashed into Lamont's giant slice of chocolate strawberry cake with far less force and only managed to bore halfway through before it struck Homewood's thatch of living snakes and stopped completely. The wrecking ball sat halfway in the cake a second before it exploded. By the time it did, Tinley managed to put up a second barrier behind Homewood's. And somehow it contained the explosion. Tinley dropped to a knee against the railing, panting heavily as her barrier went down and the scorched remains of serpent and sugar plopped into the ocean.
Get her cubes,
said Hedwig.
Terminatrix moving again,
said Paulus. Her arm shot out.
There. Fire.
It only took 3 volleys to repel the Terminatrix and she drifted back to her position on the cusp of their range, where she held still. The Seattle sisters remained in their position too, and the lull provided an opportunity for Midlothian to dispense grief cubes. An opportunity for Hedgewish to take her next breath. All positions held for 1, 2, 3 minutes. Another wrecking ball shredded through the white. Hedgewish barely had time to scream all sections ready before it came upon them. Section A put up their 3 barriers as before, but instead of crashing into Tinley's paper wall, the wrecking ball bullet lurched 90 degrees to the right and circumnavigated the barrier with no loss in speed. It swerved, jerked, and shot straight toward the center of the boat's port, starboard, left side. Kenosha's report had mentioned the younger twins' bullets zigzagged like this. So Hedgewish had prepared. Shield Team Section B already reinforced the left side of the ship. And while Section B and Section C had fewer members than Section A, Hedgewish had made sure to assign stronger shield users to compensate. A moment of truth nonetheless. The bullet crashed against Hammond's barrier and exploded. The force broke the barrier but could not pass through plain fields behind it. The Terminatrix moved forward at the same time, synchronized exactly to the bullet. But as long as the bullet failed to damage the boat, they had no problem launching more volleys to repel her. The battlefield returned to its stasis state for another 3 minutes.
Can we, even, HRRK, sustain this?
Joliet played with her eyelids.
Hours of this? Until Cicero shows? Assuming she... We have plenty of grief cubes.
Hedgewish kept her eyes glued to the binoculars. She suspected the next attack might come from high above or under the water.
And our opponent has to worry about their energy too. Attacks so powerful aren't cheap. But if the incubator... The incubator won't waste the energy if he realizes it's fruitless.
Although if he kept up the assault, it might mean he believed he'd win a war of attrition. Could she stand hours of slowly whittling, knowing the very fact they were still being attacked meant their loss was assured? Her teeth cut together.
Either way, it takes our enemy more time to recharge than it takes us. She's using more energy in one go than any of our soldiers. We have the advantage. HKKKKKH. Is that how it works?
Dumb fucking bitch. Morale must remain high, couldn't she see? If despair affected their troops, they were assuredly fucked. Hedgewish considered the best way to tell Joliet to shove something up her ass without rattling the chain of command too much. Before she could, a third bullet hurtled toward them. It went for the other side of the ship and struck Section C, who managed to block it, albeit with less aplomb than Section B. A block counted as a block in Hedgewish's book, and it meant their defenses were airtight. If the younger Seattle twin tried to attack the front of the ship, B and C could form up in time to stop it, because the sniper rifle's range limitations meant any attack had to come from the direction of the city. If she tried to attack underwater like a torpedo, the ship's military-grade sonar device, manned by Madison, would pick it up and all 3 sections could combine to place a barrier under the ship. She expected the younger twin to test these modes of attack anyway. But more minutes passed. 5 became 10. Became 15. Became 20 and then 30. The yacht bobbed. Hedgewish, Palos, all the shooters and shielders remained rooted to their positions. Even passively maintaining one's transformation drained energy, so Midlothian dispensed cubes at regular, if infrequent, intervals. Joliet finally fucked off somewhere. 45 minutes. Hedgewish became suspicious. Did it take Cube this long to conceive a counterplan? Or did he simply not have one? Under no circumstances did Hedgewish believe her scheme uncontestable. She considered the possibility that she had countered his only allocated resources in the area and that the delay wasn't because he had no plan but because he needed time to move a new piece into position. Another Terminatrix or some nomadic girl he could silver-tongue into service. Anyone with exactly the right ability to pierce their defense. Even something as simple as the ability to add more power to younger Seattle's sniper rifle. Shit, she needed to think. Counter his counters before he implemented them. Was it even possible? Christ. God. Stupid pink-haired dumbass God. Give her a little hope, since it's all you're good for. 1 hour. And all that time, the soldiers stood at their posts. No chit-chat, no small talk, none of the useless girlishness they exhibited that morning during their overlong bath. At some point Hedwig's mind could no longer whir with what possible course of action Cube might take. Her thoughts drifted. She considered God. She considered Denver. She considered the patterns the waves made. She considered her life before Chicago. Lila Chatterjee of Toronto. Freshly 15. Idiotic wish. She regretted it the instant she made it. That smart aleck, know-it-all Lila Chatterjee, how could one seethe so thoroughly at a ghostly image of themselves only months past? God made her do it, not the God she now knew but the God she thought she knew didn't exist. Whatever your particular persuasion. At the intersection of her Bengali parents and the sanctimonious rich Canadians she knew at school, Lila Chatterjee fast developed a certain opinion, that the only people who believed in God were morons. Christianity, Islam, toss in all the others too, eldritch assholes concocted to sway the masses and enslave the women. Funny how that thought could bring her all the way here, to this yacht on Lake Michigan with a bunch of child soldiers under her command. So funny. The stillness of the lake, the both close and distant threat of death, the idea that she might easily fail to survive past this day. She wanted to go home, to Toronto, to her parents, to the rich white kids, to preppy school, to that insufferable idiot Lila who scoffed at displays of faith or kindness or anything other than disaffected ennui, because that was how she had felt and anyone who was not her was stupid. She wanted everyone but her to be stupid again. She wanted to undo that wish. That dumb wish, because all along for all her smugness the dumb one was her, because her wish, listen to it, brace yourself, it's so funny, her wish.
I wish I had knowledge of God.
Clever Lila Chatterjee, seated upon a bench behind the school, legs crossed, arms stretched along the back of her seat, and Cube on the pavement before her.
I wish I had absolute, total knowledge of God.
How great a wish! How she grinned. It's a classic thought experiment.
If you had one wish, what would you wish for?
It's something your friend circle discusses at lunch. People spit out the standard replies, money, fame, world peace, whatever. But knowledge of God, that's the kind of thing you could never have without a wish, right? But if you had that certainty, that absolute 100% assuredness that God did not exist, then think of how superior you would be to all those ignoramuses. And if, perchance, God did exist, then you would be able to save your soul from whatever bullshit punishment they concoct for atheists in whichever religion happen to get it right. Win-win, no? 15-year-old Lila Chatterjee, ladies and gentlemen. And today would finally be the day she paid the piper for her brilliant, genius wish. 1 hour and 30 minutes. No, these thoughts lacked use. She had to focus on her plan and its success. She wanted Cube to appear, to offer parley, she would take whatever deal if she survived. She wanted to cry, but she imagined Joliet crying and the thought made her stronger because she refused to be Joliet. Joliet became a mantra in her head, a totem, a bogeyman, the darkness Hedwig could transfer from one soul to another. Conservation of energy, and if emotions counted as energy, then for Joliet's tears Hedgewish had to remain strong to counterbalance. If Cubey intended. Palos shouted an unintelligible, overexcited gurgle that upon a phlegmatic throat clearing transformed into actual words.
One of the Seattles, she's incoming. One? Where? How far? This is insane, how is she this fast? She's already 4 miles, 3 miles, 2.
That many miles in seconds. Hedgewish pressed the binoculars to her face. A moment later it tore through the mist. One of the younger twins' wrecking ball bullets. And perched atop it, balanced precariously but somehow able to stand, the older twin, the one in medieval armor.
Fuck no!
Hedgewish spiked the binoculars onto the deck and they bounced up surrounded by their shattered lenses.
Blast her out of the sky!
McKenna and Munster fired, Hazel Crest pricked a finger drawing her bow and dropped her arrow. Griffith failed to flash her camera, so 2 sad projectiles zipped toward the accelerated armor girl. McKenna actually managed to hit her, but the bullet bounced off the armor. And that was their last shot, because by then the wrecking ball reached them. Shield Team Section A did their job. The same 3 barriers layered atop one another. The bullet itself broke the first barrier and a flash of the elder twins' neon mace cut the second. In the ensuing explosion, Hedgewish's body lifted from the ground and she sustained for a second the sensation of flight. A feeling she both failed to comprehend and logically understood to be shell shock rattled her brain inside her headcase. She hit a railing, bounced, and slammed against a deck nose first. A Rorschach blot of blood splurted in front of her. "Get up!" She said it, "Get up!" Not that her voice existed under the torrent of ripping, wrenching, twisting, screeching, searing, and whooshing. Her hands wobbled. "Get up or die!" Her first attempt to stand lacked any coordination between her limbs and a moment passed where she broke down the action of standing into its component muscle movements like a blueprint, one that made no sense. The second attempt went better and with the help of the railing she pulled herself upright. Her knees buckled, she straightened them. She spat more blood overboard. 2 gold armor girls thrashed in the water, Hazel Crest, Palos. Palos rode her broomstick and attempted to prevent Hazel Crest from sinking. Blood from the headless, shoulderless body of somebody nearby splattered against Hedgewish's back. Perched atop the bending railing, the elder Seattle twin drew back her neon mace and brought it upon the supine form of Homewood. The ball of the mace bounced and left under it only a waist and a pair of legs and a full circle of unbroken redness against the deck. Another girl, Lamont, clawed up a ladder to the second deck and tucked her legs at the perfect moment to avoid losing them to another swipe. On the opposite end of the deck as Hedgewish, Tinley conjured a coil of checkerboard pattern paper. It folded into a giant origami python that coiled between the railing and slung its massive body against the side of the boat, rearing up to strike Seattle from behind. Hedgewish had to, she snapped at Palos,
"Where's the Terminatrix?"
Palos managed to drape Hazel Crest onto her broomstick and reached out to someone else, Munster or McKenna or someone, who also thrashed in the water, but the broomstick seemed incapable of supporting the weight of 3 people.
Oh fuck! She's closing, 3 miles, fast!
A swoom of the mace smashed massive structural damage in the paper python and liquid hot pulp pattered against Hedgewish's nape. 20 against Seattle they could handle, but if the Terminatrix got involved, no, not an if/then question at this point, the long-range team no longer existed. The barriers managed to prevent major structural damage to the yacht, they still floated, but in a minute the Terminatrix's projections would manifest and any hope of salvaging the situation. No salvaging. The situation ended. Time for Plan B, run like hell. The yacht came equipped with 4 lifeboats. Flimsy rubber boats, but motorized. She had to hope the chaos of the situation worked to her advantage, that she could slip away unnoticed and skim to safety before anyone cared about her. She sprinted around the corner, away from the distracted Seattle, or tried to sprint, because she slid on a slick of blood and a loose arm and fell hard enough to rip the knees of her pants and tear the skin of her kneecaps. The screams intensified everywhere. She shoved past several soldiers trying to reach the fracas. Someone stopped and asked her for orders, and she said, she had the audacity to say,
"Defend the yacht at all costs. I'm securing the Empire's files."
And continued running until she reached the first door inside. The interior of the yacht looked nothing like how it had on Hedwig's previous visit when she spoke to the Empress. No trace of the room that once existed, with its fireplace and 2 high walls and dark atmosphere, with its Renaissance artwork and bookshelves, with its tall back seat and the Empress inside it. The interior instead comprised a generically luxurious entertainment area, sofas arranged around chic tables, a counter tucked into one corner, and behind it shelves stocked with fruity beverages. A window shattered for an uncertain reason as she scrambled inside. Stacked in the center of the room were the crates she ordered removed from the administration building. First, she overturned a sofa and pried up a panel underneath. Around her neck she slipped the life vest she found and then overturned a tower of crates and kicked open the one that contained her M240 Lima machine gun. She had a shotgun and assault rifle around somewhere, but she did not see their crates immediately and decided against wasting time as she attached the machine gun's ammunition belt. The inflatable lifeboats were stored in compartments at each corner of the ship. Her best bet would be the ship's prow and hope the arrangement of her remaining troops kept the fighting focused at the rear. She wiped her forehead and blood came off. In one instant the sounds of fighting pitched higher and several more windows shattered as a liquid ooze of bodies strove around. A vast array of colorful combatants had appeared outside, the Terminatrix's projections. Her hand fumbled 50 fucking times, but she got the belt into the gun and hefted it. She told herself, don't fire unless you have to. She told herself, hurry. The prow. But she hesitated. The other girls. Orland, Palos, Midlothian, Hazel Crest, Tinley, Griffith, all of them. The ones she led. The ones she told, I'll make sure you all survive. Fuck. The world's biggest hypocrite right now, no? Denver, how had you done it? How had you gone back into the miasma? How had you fought to protect your own foes? No color remained in Hedwig's body. She shook harder than she had when the bomb exploded and Seattle breached their ship. Something erupted outside and the entire boat quaked. Crates fell, broke open, and grief cubes sprayed across the ground in tesserae patterns. Anyone nearby? Anyone nearby when she boarded the lifeboat? Yeah. Anyone nearby, she'd take with her. She would be saving more lives than if she stayed and fought. Oh fuck it. Fuck the excuses. Fucking. Fuck. Fuck. She screamed it, fuck. Even screaming she could not hear herself, even screaming brought her no relief as the world crashed around her. The massive form of the armored Seattle sister broke through the tide of bodies clustered outside and barreled toward the prow. The prow no longer held hope. Hedwig fucked herself, she hesitated, she waited too long. She fucked up. Her duty, as a leader, to these girls, she had a duty as their leader. The captain goes down with the ship, she had a duty to this sham nation Chicago. She had a duty to the frightened young girls she said she'd protect, to the liquid-eyed face of Joliet. Okay. Okay. She was leader now. She would take responsibility. Reap her rewards. The concept of death horrified her. Even knowledge of God did not abate it. Even the hope that God loved them and would protect their souls did not abate it. Still, she had a duty. She was not Joliet, afraid. Not DuPage, self-centered. Not Cook, lackadaisical. Not the Empress, hypocritical. Not her parents, fanatical. Not Madoka Kaname, conceptual. This opulent room, this would be her final stand. She would protect. But everything inside to protect was inanimate. Papers. A war raged around her. Sure, she could protect the papers. That last vestige of duty. Junior Administrator Hedgewish. The files, the spreadsheets, the documents, to sort and organize, to fall away from the world and find joy and tedium, in minutiae, now which crates contained the files. Shaky-legged, she crawled along the tower of crates. A seismic boom outside brought her to a knee. She rounded the tower to its other side. Which was when she discovered someone alive in this room the whole time. And that someone, seated Buddha-like, but with her back bent forward, several open crates around her, and the Empire's most classified documents in piles, that someone, flipping through the documents as fast as possible, was Clown Muffle. The latest explosion sounded different than the others, and soon everyone started yelling. Those not already at the back of the boat ran toward it, and Joliet hung her head and shrugged. Her shrug turned into a slump of her shoulders.
Well, it's ending now,
she muttered to herself. Hedgewish lied when she said everything would be okay and they would all survive. Well, she probably didn't lie. She was just wrong. Joliet sat at the prow of the ship, facing the water eastward, and wrapped her arms around herself. If she did not resist, they might at least do her the courtesy of ending it quickly. She wouldn't even transform, although her transformed armor had her mother's enchantment. Or maybe she refused to transform because she didn't want to find out her mother never enchanted her armor at all. A lesser force shook the boat. She clutched the sides of her head and stared into the water. Let it end. Let it end. Let it end. Sometimes she had nightmares where a monster or murderer chased her. And at some point she would shudder in her sleep, give in, turn around, and say, "Please just end it fast." The monster never knew what to do. It stood and stared at her, which only horrified her more. The icy air made her shiver. She watched the water's patterns while the battle raged behind her, and then in a nervy fit she jolted upright and rapped her knuckles against her forehead. The blood drained out of her skull, and for a weightless moment she saw only black. In that time she already began groping along the ship's railing, and when her sight returned she had neared the cabin where they stored the equipment. Ships, even a pleasure yacht, had life rafts. A fanciful thought struck her that her mother somehow removed all the life rafts ahead of time in exact preparation for this moment. Nonetheless, she reached a panel on the wall clearly marked with orange tape and bold black lettering. She wrenched it open, and inside she found a compact cube of rubber with a drawstring and simple instructions: pull and toss into the water. It felt too easy. Like stuff of this sort ought to be unfathomably complex, so that in one's final throes while the ship submerged around them they could reel back in abject incomprehension of the designs provided to save them. She could not imagine a world in which a life raft actually saved someone. And yet here she was, yanking the drawstring so hard she thought she ripped it off entirely. The heavy cube hissed with air intake and expanded. She hurled it overboard and it slapped the water as its sides folded into the form of a boat with a tiny motor. It took maybe 5 seconds total to fully inflate. Again, Joliet was baffled at how a device meant to save someone during an emergency actually did its job. She gripped the railing and prepared to hop into the raft, but at the last moment she turned her head toward the back of the ship to see if anyone might be nearby she could tell to join her. But while previously the narrow passageway along the side of the deck had been clogged with girls in golden armor, now the only flash of gold she saw came from a body cleaved in half by the swing of a neon mace. The upper half twirled over the side, while the legs sagged against the railing. Behind them stood a massive, medieval figure, a knight encased head to toe in spiky metal. Through the closed beaver of the armored girl's helm, no sense of facial expression existed. Yet somehow Joliet knew those unseen eyes had fixed directly on her and the malevolent intent behind them flowed into her body. The raging combat lulled as Joliet ceased breathing. A hazy, foggy blanket fell upon everything, like the world became one of her nightmares. The knight stepped past the disembodied legs, toward Joliet. Joliet hoisted herself up the railing and swung herself over the edge. A sudden thought that she need only get the life raft started, spurred far enough away from the yacht. The knight could not swim, no way. But she did not even get to start the motor. She did not even get over the railing. She made it halfway before the knight initiated a sudden sprint, hooked a gauntlet hand into Joliet's stomach, and flung her down the deck. She hit the wood, bounced, clanged into a metal protrusion. Something small and narrow, like a jutting screw, drove into the flesh of her side, just above the hip. She rolled over, confused by the mingling of white sky and brown deck and blue sea, and before she had a chance to react a metal foot nailed her under the chin. Her head jerked back like it would come off, but her neck somehow held and the excess momentum traveled to her whole body and she hurtled. Hit metal and wood again. Fell over coughing blood. It hurt. A lot. Puella Magi had an innate ability to dull physical pain, or so she had been told, since never in her life had she partaken in combat. If what she felt were diminished, the oppressive shrieking in her flesh that locked her ability to make even moderate movements, she refused to wonder what the full force might be. She had to do something. The iron footsteps pounded closer, and this time the figure they belonged to hefted its neon mace overhead. Joliet gripped the ring on her middle finger and transformed. A flash enveloped her, and in that moment the sweaters vanished and gilded vestments replaced them, with long sleeves like a monk's habit and a cowl to match, but more ornamental flourishes in the puffy shoulders and arabesque designs that traveled down her front. Her mother once said that Joliet would be the heart of the 4 centurions, the most learned, wise, and clerical. She said this during a speech she gave to the other centurions, of course, not in any kind of personal conversation, which was Joliet's only explanation for such an unpleasant outfit. She regretted transforming. If she died, she would have preferred to die somewhat presentable, and she had no faith in her mother's invincibility enchantment. None whatsoever. At least until the mace came down and bounced off her back. The knight staggered several steps until she struck a metal nautical thing. Not one unit of force had transferred from the swing into Joliet's body. Like her costume swallowed the entire attack. Her mother's enchantment worked. It brought little comfort, because her attacker recovered fast and said, "Ah, so you're a centurion?" She did not attack immediately, which gave Joliet time to climb to her feet using the railing, but before she got halfway the armored hand shot out and seized Joliet by the back of the neck. Again, no sensation passed through the enchanted cloth hood, but the strength of the arm lifted Joliet off her feet and she shivered helpless in the grasp. Yeah, that's the thing. Invulnerability was nice, but a stronger opponent could subdue without inflicting harm. At which point it became only a matter of waiting. How long could Joliet even sustain her transformation? Maybe an hour, or 2. and that assumed they didn't find a more creative way to end her. Tying her to something heavy and dumping her overboard should work. It turned out the knight had no need for that. She dropped her mace and with her other hand reached under the folds of Joliet's cowl. Her fingers wrapped around Joliet's exposed face. The fingers began to squeeze. The force was immense. The pressure compounded instantaneously upon every corner, from forehead to jaw. The palm pressed against Joliet's nose and her feet kicked involuntarily. Her hands groped the armored girl's breastplate and speared themselves upon its spikes. Her eyes bulged. Her teeth gnashed. Her nose cracked and liquid ran down her face. The skin ripped. The grip tightened. Every second stretched an eternity. Having no face would not kill her. She would remain, an eyeless ghoul, bleeding upon the deck, capable at all moments of feeling herself die. She had to do something. What had Hedgewish asked? Can your power be used offensively? Under normal circumstances, no, she had to be far too close to her foe to use it, but her foe had come close to her, they were enmeshed. Yet on such short notice, her power did not have the easy application some might expect. Yes, she could alter memories, she could retool what someone imagined, even how their cognitive processes worked to some extent, but the human mind had the capacity to thwart even magic. If she introduced a memory that contradicted other memories, the brain would rapidly reject it. She could only bend someone's mind so far, which was why she did best when she erased memories, as she had for those who knew the truth about DuPage. But if she built something inside a mind, it required subtlety. For instance, tweaking a person known for whole-scale devotion to appealing aesthetics so they believed a specific portrait was the most beautiful object. That worked better than attempting to brainwash a new recruit into complete subservience when their extant personality would never do such a thing. Alternatively, she worked well with a blank slate, someone who had zero memories at all, for whom she could write their lives from scratch and they would accept it wholeheartedly, like she often did with Dr. Cho's homunculi, authoring an entire backstory, an abusive stepfather or a lifelong devotion to God. Those were her favorite assignments. She loved to work with Dr. Cho and invent entire people, but in this moment, her face in the process of being crushed, and an opponent she knew barely anything about. What did she know? The night girl had a twin. The other twin was nearby, according to Hedgewish, a joker who used a sniper rifle. As the plate of her forehead cracked and her brains leaked, she conceived an idea. Would it work? Probably not permanently, but if she framed a specific memory in a certain way, it might work long enough. She had no other hope. Her hands impaled themselves on the spikes of the knight's armor. A pulse, a transmission, a signal shot from Joliet to her, while behind them the boat rocked with the force of another attack. The knight's hand pressed for another second, and then loosened. Joliet dropped onto the deck, vision red. She wiped her face and tried to hold it together even though so many parts had cracked it felt like pottery shards. But although her sight blurred, she could see, and she watched the knight to learn if the memory magic held. A second passed. 2. The knight turned from Joliet without a word. She picked up the dropped mace, then walked calmly to the edge of the yacht. Her armor clanked with each step. She climbed over the railing and dropped off the edge of the boat. Joliet couldn't believe it. Even if her magic worked, and the memory she implanted was not rejected, to cause a reaction like that, but then a small motor revved up and Joliet realized the knight had not plunged to suicide in the icy sink. Still shaky, Joliet pulled herself up and wobbled to the edge to confirm as the knight rowed away on the inflatable dinghy Joliet had tossed overboard earlier. The dinghy zipped along the water, back toward Chicago. It worked. It actually worked. The memory held. Who knew for how long, but if it could last at least another hour, even a half hour, then it might actually help them win. It might eliminate not only the knight, but the Joker twin too. Joliet refused to believe it. Refused to believe she did something that actually worked. She gripped her tectonic face and tilted it back to laugh. Then saw the line of dismembered Chicago soldiers slopping the deck and the advancing tide of what must be the Terminatrix's projections heading for her. End of chapter. Chapter end.